I drive an electric car, and I feel good about it. But there's a hidden side to everything, and so today we're going to dive into the environmental impact of an electric car. These days, lots of people are looking into buying an electric car as their next new vehicle, or they're trying to find used ones to replace their old, low gas mileage car. Some people want the convenience of charging at home. Some want the luxury of driving a fun-to-drive car. Others want to lessen their carbon footprint, and yet others are skeptical about the whole thing. The charging, the cost of the car, etc. In this video, we're going to cover all of those things and more, but we're going to start with the easiest, which is the cost of the car. For the purposes of simplicity, we're only going to be talking about buying new cars. Buying used cars, the cost gets cut significantly, and you can do your own research. Kelley Blue Book puts the average price of a new electric car at about $42,000. This is on the high side of normal. You can get an entry-level luxury car for about the same price. Now we're going to ignore the cost of gasoline, which would add price to a gas-powered car in the long run. However, that's a long-term benefit, so we're just going to go into the cost of buying an electric car now as compared to a standard gasoline-powered car. The difference between an electric car and a gas-powered car is that the federal government and your state governments want you to buy an electric car and not a new gas car. They're willing to give you a significant chunk of your money back on taxes if you buy an electric car. For the federal government, you have to buy a new electric car from brands that aren't Toyota, Lexus, Tesla, or General Motors. This still leaves a ton of options, and you can get $7,500 off the purchase of your new electric vehicle. As long as you're buying a new car, this brings the cost down to about $35,000, which is the same as a full-size car, according to Kelley Blue Book. Here in Oregon, you can get another $7,500 back on your taxes if you buy a new electric vehicle. So in total, the government will give you $15,000 towards an electric car. You might be thinking, this is too good to be true. It isn't. The government wants to be independent. The government wants to reduce emissions. The government wants you to buy an electric car. Now, if you're thinking, okay, well, the cost sounds great, but how do I get this thing charged up? Well, it's super simple. You can plug a car into an outlet at home, and as long as you don't drive it a ton, it'll stay fully charged or close to it. Cars usually spend most of the time they are owned just sitting in one place, about 22 or 23 hours a day. For most drivers, electric cars only need to be fully charged about once a week. But even if you are a commuter, you can charge your car pretty much anywhere. And also, if you're buying a new car companies are competing to get the highest range on their electric cars, which means you're going to get the benefit of that by seeing range increase over time. And not to mention, there are chargers everywhere. There's a link to the map with all the EV chargers in the US down in the description. Now that we've proven that the cost of electric cars is no more or even is less than the cost of a gas-powered car, we can talk about the fun part. And the truth of the matter is, electric cars are fun. A combustion engine needs to get revved up to be able to provide torque. An electric motor provides that torque instantly, which provides unmatched acceleration from electric cars. Now sure, combustion engine cars that are designed to go fast rather than the consumer electric car, they'll accelerate faster, but if you buy an electric car, you're buying a pretty capable one. And this is true of even the cheapest electric cars on the market. Plus, the battery of an electric car is in the floor, and it's pretty heavy, which means it's got a low center of gravity, which means great traction and great steering capabilities. In fact, in the winter when the roads get slick, an electric car will handle just as well as a small SUV because of its low center of gravity and its large mass. And not only do you get the convenience of a good handling car, but you also get the silence of riding without a combustion engine. I'll never forget the first time I rode in an electric car. I climbed in, and then I didn't know the car was on until we started pulling backwards. There's a more serious matter, though, than the fun of driving an electric car, and that's that electric cars will cost you a lot less in the long run. Not only will they cost a lot less when you originally purchased them, but you won't need to pay for gas, and you won't need to pay for maintenance very much. The extent of any maintenance that needs to happen on an electric car is you need to rotate the tires every once in a while, maybe get them replaced, and you'll need to change the cabin air filter. An electric motor leaves very little to need to lubricate, so there are no oil changes. Plus, because most of your braking is done by running the electric motor backwards and recharging the battery, brake wear is minimal on the brake pads. And like I said earlier, cost of charging is a lot less than the cost of gasoline. If you use level 2 chargers or level 3 chargers scattered around that are owned by companies like Blink or ChargePoint, you'll end up paying about 1/3 as much for fuel for your car. If you charge at home with your outlet, you're paying pennies on the dollar. And in my experience, you never really need to charge anywhere away from home. At least this is the case if you're just commuting. Now, I've shared with you a bunch of good stuff about electric cars. They're cheap, they're fun to drive, but there's an environmental cost as well. There's a myth going around that electric cars actually create more emissions than gasoline-powered ones because of the energy it takes to create the electricity. This is saddening to think that this would be the case, but luckily it's not true. Roughly 80% of the gasoline that you burn in a combustion engine goes towards heat. It warms stuff up. It makes the engine warm. It does not go into pushing the car forwards. So gasoline-powered cars are very inefficient. That's an efficiency of 20%. But power plants aren't much better. They operate at around an efficiency of 35%. Now, if these numbers were true, electric cars would already be better, but it gets better than that. A lot of the United States' power is nuclear, which means it doesn't emit anything. It's the coal and natural gas power plants that we're worrying about, and those are less frequent in certain areas. So if you're living in the Pacific Northwest, where most of our power is hydroelectric, coming from the Columbia River, then you're basically gold. The Midwest does burn a lot of coal for their power, which means that driving an electric car in that area is not necessarily the greatest idea. However, in New England, most of their power is nuclear, which means that they can power their electric cars with very, very few emissions. If you want to research your region and see if driving an electric car in your area makes sense, check out the map in the description. So now we've proven that electric cars are a good idea to purchase, and they're a good idea for the emissions after they've been purchased. But what about the manufacturing of them? This topic actually scared me for a while, and I never actually did my research. I was worried that I was actually driving something that would make the environment worse, not better. So driving an electric car emits a fraction of the emissions that are being put out by a gas-powered car. But in the manufacturing process, there's one key difference between a gas-powered car and an electric car, and that's the battery. The battery of an electric car produces just about the same amount of emissions as producing the rest of the car. So basically, to make an electric car, you're putting out twice the normal amount of emissions to create a vehicle. However, the difference in the long run between a gas-powered car's emissions and an electric car's emissions is significant. A car with a combustion engine will put out about twice the amount of emissions over the course of its lifetime than an electric car will. So if you don't plan to keep your car for a long period of time, then buying an electric car is not the greatest idea for you. Mining for lithium for the car's batteries is a very intense process, which means it creates lots of greenhouse gases. And frankly, it's not sustainable at this point in time. But technology is getting better, and I have hope for the future that lithium will hopefully become a more sustainable resource, we'll be able to recycle batteries more effectively, and we will have a sustainable way of creating batteries for our electric cars without putting out so many emissions. Although I'm not leaving you on the greatest of notes, driving an electric car is a good thing for the environment. It's not going to harm it more than it helps. Are electric cars gonna save the world though? That lies in the hands of hydrogen, not electric cars. So, frankly, no, but it's a good stepping stone. So, if you're interested, do your own research. While we can't neglect the effects of producing electric cars, over the long term, they're still a good idea. We need to consider the damage that will be done if no action is taken. If we don't change anything, it could be devastating. But this process is a marathon, not a sprint. Technology will advance. Hydrogen cars will become more prevalent than they already are. But for now, buying and driving a battery electric vehicle is still much better than driving a combustion-powered vehicle. And if you live in an area where coal provides most of your electricity, that's okay. Driving a hybrid might be a good idea for you. All in all, Alternative fuel vehicles will save the world, just not quite yet.